Hello and welcome to the January 2020 edition of SheThePeople.tv's Women Writers Fest. Thank you very much for joining us for this panel discussion on how I write. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Shaili Chopra, Andaleeb Wajid, and Parinda Joshi, who will share their secrets to writing amazing books. Shaili Chopra is the founder of SheThePeople.tv and a game changer in the world of content. She helps and supports women to claim their power and use it. Andaleeb Wajid is a hybrid author of 32 published novels and writes across different genres. Andaleeb's novel, When She Went Away, was shortlisted for the Hindu Young World Prize in 2017. Parinda Joshi is a best-selling novelist and screenplay writer. One of her novels, Made in China, was adapted into a feature film. Her latest work is a social thriller for which she co-wrote the story and screenplay. Welcome, ladies. It's a pleasure to have you here. Shaili,
thank you.
I begin with you. Yes. Now, you own a women's channel and are an influencer. Your work obviously takes away a chunk of your time. So how do you make time for your own writing?
Thanks for having me, Archana, and wonderful to be here with Andaleeb and Parinda. And it's just so fascinating, the kind of work that's getting done. Thanks so much for having me here with them. You know, for me, I'm a very unusual writer, and I say this so often that people have stopped believing me that I have to push myself to write, not because I don't have the love for writing, but because I'm trying to juggle a bunch of different things. And writing is something I want to reserve some time and space for. Unlike the authors here who are, our mainstream authors, I would say I need to someday, that's my dream to get there, For me, I write for many reasons. I write because I need to tell stories of those that have in silence and stayed there in our DMs and just not managed to come out because they are going through such difficult times. I feel the need to share those, very important nuances of our society where people are in hiding out of fear. I think I also write because I'm able to, as somebody who's had a very public life for nearly 20 years, instill a sense of fearlessness in what people are trying to say, but are finding it difficult to say it themselves. When I sit down to write, I also think about the fact that what am I writing, right? My writing is nonfiction, and that makes it easier, do you think? I feel, because I feel fiction writers are phenomenal in terms of what they build. They're building as they go. I'm doing more research as I go. And that is something that I feel has been my kind of writing, right? Like, why do I ask myself when women's stories are not told, how they need to be told, what needs to be said differently after generations of being said before. For example, my recent book was about feminism, and people laughed at me when I said that this book on feminism is going to talk about contemporary voices who we see in newspapers every now and then, and ask them what feminism is to them. The purist felt the need for feminism to be a very strongly researched book. And I said, we need to put an everyday lens to what we write so that we can hear everyday stories. So that's how I sort of put myself in the writing desk. It's sort of all over the place. Other than the fact that I'll have a cup of tea with it, I really don't think that I have a serious routine of writing. I wish I did.
Now you run a digital platform, and ironically, to be able to write, you have to get away from the screen. So how do you keep distractions away? Do you feel the need to be connected all the time? Do you feel you'll miss out if you're not connected? So that could be quite a problem, right? So how do you work around that?
It is a problem. It is a problem. And not just because I am addicted to what we are doing at She the People, because I'm addicted to social media. And social media has been sort of perhaps one of the reasons why I started writing in all kinds of formats. And this happened at the start of 2007, 2008, when I became an early tweeter and then sort of started exploring the power of digital, since I was a mainstream TV journalist. So no doubt. But I also think that there's something to be said about people like me who are very edgy and are constantly trying to do a lot of other things just because they're distracted, not because that's what's called focus. It's just predominantly the fact that I feel I learn a lot from what I'm seeing around me on social media. And a lot of my writing is actually using that as a little survey I keep doing with my eyes every day, right? What are people reading? Why are they reading that? Is this a new version of ourselves? Are we back into vanity? Are we actually going to go away from it because of what we are seeing? So there are a bunch of those things. I'm actually looking forward to hear what Parinda and Andaleeb are going to
Yes.
tell me, because I'm going to go back learning so much more from that.
Sure. Thank you. Andaleeb, you have written 12 books in 2 years. 12. That's 6 books in 1 year. That means one book every 2 months. I'm wondering if that's some kind of a record. I mean, that's quite a feat. How do you manage that? One book
So,
every 2 months, Andaleeb.
thank you for having me here. Thank you for that introduction, Archana, and thank you, She the People and Shaili. So, I'm sorry, I kind of missed your question, Archana.
No, what I'm asking you is you have written 12 books in 2 years, right? That's 6 books in a year and one book every 2 months. I mean, who does that? And that's quite a feat. So, how do you manage to do that?
So,
Everyone would like to know.
so I'm not the only one. I think, a lot of people in the indie publishing world, which is very different from your traditional publishing industry, where an author bringing out one book a year is considered like, being too prolific. In the indie publishing world, it's a different game. So I kind of straddle both worlds, and I have to strike a balance of sorts, because I switched to self-publishing because there's definitely more money in it. So it has to be a sort of strategy. Um, Things work out when you have a series, when you have a series of connected stories, like three sisters or four cousins or whatever. So you write one book and you bring in the other characters, and the readers want to know when is the next book coming out. So it kind of is like a sort of writing, say, an episodic thing for for TV or something. Of course, I'm not comparing to that, but what I mean to say is that if you have, I treat it like a job. I don't treat it like I don't treat my writing as a whim, because I don't. I decided a few years ago that I don't want to do any other job. I want to make money from my writing. I don't want to do content writing. I don't want to do other things. I mean, I used to work in the corporate world. I in the marketing department of a software company, and it's very difficult to try and push things, try and sell things when you don't really believe in them. So it kind of made me feel, even though it was a struggle, definitely a struggle initially, to figure out what it is. I was like, can someone just pay me to write books? So that I realized that the option, the avenue was always there, but I didn't realize how to utilize it until 2019, when I self-published my first novel. um, Actually, my one of my books is very popular with readers even today. It's called My Brother's Wedding, and I've had readers asking me to write a sequel for it from years. And I wrote the outline, I wrote the chapters. I, in fact, wrote the entire book and sent it to the same publisher, who said that no, we're not interested. So I was like, I have this book sitting with me. I want readers to, get access to it. I initially thought I'll put it up on Wattpad, but then I thought I'm writing a story and I think I deserve to be paid for it. So I put it up on Amazon KDP, and there's been a huge learning curve trying to figure out that, how things work in the traditional publishing world is very different from how it works in the self-publishing world. So for me, writing 12 books in 2 years, I've actually written a little more than that. I think I have a book coming out. In fact, a new one, part of a new series. So once I finished a series, I take a little bit of time to see what worked, what didn't work. It's a lot like a job, but also a sort of an I'm being an entrepreneur also when I'm self-publishing my books, because I'm putting out a product there. And as much as I hate the way it sounds, I have to think of it in that way if I want to make money. So for me, it's like a sort of balance between the creative side, and I don't have any issues with marketing, but the entire business side of it still eludes me sometimes. So I'm trying to strike a balance between that. And in the indie publishing world, you will come across a lot of writers who bring out, I think more books than I write. It's just that I think, because self-publishing doesn't have gatekeepers like editors and all that, some of these books may not be really, may not be up to the level that a traditional publisher would bring out. So I think, I think a lot more people need to discover writers in the indie publishing world, and they'll be amazed at what else is out there.
Well,
I hope
thank
that
you. That's
answers
great.
your question.
Yes, yes, wonderful. Parinda, at what point in your career did you turn to writing? Because you were doing something else, right? And did you face any difficulties while writing your first book? And if you did, what did you do? Did you seek guidance of a mentor? How did you overcome the challenges?
Right. That's a great question. So first of all, thank you so much for having me, She the People, Shaili, Archana. Really lovely to meet you all and delighted to be here. Thanks again. So I think I remember going back to my middle school days is when I started, paying attention to my love for reading, writing. I would spend hours with the dictionary, picking out, cool new words, creating sentences around it. I had a couple of friends who moved away to different countries, and I treated them as my pen pals. Remember pen pals from back in the day? And that was my playground for experimenting with language. So I think that it's around that time, around middle school when it started. But growing up where I grew in Ahmedabad, I didn't have any role models. I didn't personally know any writers. I didn't know the path to becoming a published author. Now, the landscape's very different. There's lit agents, there's a lot of information available on the internet. Wasn't the case back then. So I just did the tried and tested route, did my computer science, etc. I still have a corporate job, which I love. But that latent desire to write was always there. And when I had my first kid, and I was on leave for about 4 months, and she was an angel, God bless her. She slept a lot, and so I worked in entertainment in Los Angeles. I'm from Ahmedabad, but I moved to LA then, and I worked in entertainment for a sports and music company. So I was very privy to behind the scenes stories from the pop world. And so just for fun, I wrote this novel. It was straight from the heart. It wasn't much about the craft of writing as more about the characters, the story. It was a coming of age story about a young Indian musician against the backdrop of the British industry. And I just wrote from what I knew. This is many years back. Again, being so far removed from the Indian publishing industry, not having any access to lit agents, I didn't really know how to go about it. So when I was done with my multiple rounds of edits, I just did the cold calling thing where I went to every publisher's website and looked up their submission guidelines and, sent my query letters. And one day in a Fatahua envelope, a contract came, no email, no phone call, just a contract. And I think it was complete beginner's luck. And that one just kind of, did well. But then that's when I realized that if I have to do this seriously and if I have to continue doing this, then I really have to put in the time, learn the craft. So from that point on, for many years, and I still do that, I taught myself a lot, read a lot of books, became a part of multiple writers groups over the years where I learned a lot. I'm still a part of the Berkeley Writers Group around here. Just you learn so much from people critiquing your work and vice versa. So at the end of it all, I felt like I almost had a, MFA in creative writing. I say that lightly, but so that, and of course, a lot of online courses. We're lucky to live in an era where there is just so much access to information in terms of online. I just finished taking a class from Margaret Atwood and, Aaron Sorkin, and just blew my mind at the kind of, info that one couldn't even imagine a few years back, having access to this, world-class experts. And so that's what I do when I'm on my treadmill at the gym. I'm just, listening to a couple of masterclass sessions, and it just continues to blow my mind at how much there is more to learn. So that's what kind of I did. So yes, you can say I had mentors of sorts from my writing groups. I also have, a group of early readers, because writing is such a lonely process that if you're off track, you can really go down that rabbit hole, and it's unless there's somebody to snap you out of it, it's it's very easy to get derailed. And so I do have my group of early readers, my friends, who kind of bounce my ideas around. They're my soundboards. And so I keep that process going so that it's not so lonely. I now kind of juggle both screenplay writing as well as novel writing. I enjoy screenplay writing so much more because it's far more. It's there's far more. It's a bigger team. There's more dialogue writers. It's just a bigger crew who write there. The producers are involved from early on, and so everything that you're putting out there is getting vetted of sorts. And so you're getting validation or otherwise of what's working, what's not working very early on, which is not the case with a novel, right? With a novel, you have your 70, 80,000 page novel. And then when I remember I was in tears the first time the first edit came back, it was all bleeding in red. I'm like, oh my gosh, what is this? It broke my heart. That's not something that happens with screenplay just because it's a bigger group of people. So that's a process that I immensely enjoy as well. And yeah, so like it's a constant process, learning, along the way as you go.
Yes. Thank you for that insight. Shaili, I'm coming back to you. You often go to stay away in the mountains. Is that your need as a writer? And how does that help? And I also want to know, can you write anywhere or do you need your own sanctuary? And what is your sanctuary like?
That's great. So I don't need a sanctuary. I can find a sanctuary where I am, and it doesn't matter whether it's a metro train ride or whether it's me just sitting, leg up on a corner, which is completely nondescript in my house. I don't necessarily need that because I have grown over time to live in a very busy sort of job, and that has required me to find more of a mental sanctuary than a physical sanctuary. I do go back to the hills. I'm really fortunate to have a little pad. It started out as an escape during COVID, but it's become certainly an inspiration to do different things. I have through my quiet walks here, found lots of ideas that have finally taken shape in some form or the other, including a book as well that should be coming up later this year. And so it's been interesting to see how when you change an environment, you do get inspiration. When I was growing up, falling in and out of love, I thought the only inspiration came through pain. And that's how I started writing a little bit of amateur poetry back then, which has paused since then. And I just feel like, there is need for inspiration around you. A lot of that inspiration, again, came to me when I started writing about women's issues because I felt very strongly about it. Somehow, I'm a kind of author who, if not writing a very research-focused nonfiction book, I need a lot of inspiration to get triggered, to do something, to do, particularly write, let's say, a short story for internal purposes, let me add. But so I think I do try and find my sanctuary. And it's just been a comfortable journey for me to do that because I feel that I will not be able to, like many other authors who can find just time for writing. I have not made writing my mainstream yet. And therefore, I feel that I'll have to make myself uncomfortably comfortable and get down to writing because I need to write, I need to maintain deadlines, and I need to make sure that the publishers respect the fact that I respect their timelines too. So yeah, that's me.
So then what happens to those ideas that you get when you're walking? Do you carry a diary or do you jot them down on your phone? Because you can't possibly lose them, right? Because you're saying you don't write every day, but you get all these ideas. So what happens to them?
Yeah, so I do maintain notepads, several of them, like many people, with very, very long lists, and I haven't yet gone back to all of them. But I think it's just like one of those things, right? You have these articles even online on your own lists, and you're like, okay, I have to read that someday. And I have like 8,000 of those articles, and I don't know when I'm starting. But I do try and put them down. There are a few ideas that also take flight for whatever reason. Maybe that's something that I can do, or maybe that's interesting enough for me to focus immediately. But yes, I do that. I keep that. Like I have been wanting to write, my first fiction at some point, and I'm already in 41, and I don't know when I'll start. But I've just jotted it all down there.
Andaleeb, you have mentioned when someone asked you how do you get ideas, and you said ideas are everywhere. I mean, I know that ideas are everywhere, but I can't spot them. How do you manage to, track them so beautifully, and so many of them? There has to be some secret. Please let us know.
So I think what I usually, I used to conduct creative writing workshops with another writer a few years ago. One of the things that I normally like to do, especially when I'm talking to students about getting ideas, when we used to do these workshops in schools, I would tell them this, that ideas are there everywhere, but we need to also be open enough to look for them. So, most of the time life is passing us by. We're not really receptive to ideas. We're not actually actively going around saying that this could be an idea, that could be an idea. It's just that, the writerly mind, I think, is kind of tuned to finding situations, people, scenes, which kind of, you feel that this scene will really be perfect in a book. And then I start building it, building a story around it. I remember once, like one of my stories, the one that you mentioned, when she went away. The story for this book came. The idea was something that was there with me from a long time, since I was a child. I had overheard my mother and aunt talking about a woman who had who had abandoned her family and run away with someone. So that was one thing. But, so as a child, that was stayed with me, like a mother who's left her family and gone away. But a few years ago, like, several years ago, I was in Commercial Street. I was at a tailor, actually, and I was, waiting for him to finish something. And I saw this man and woman, middle-aged, very normal looking, not at all, they were not young people or anything, but they were talking very intensely. There was a very intense conversation going on. I couldn't hear what they were saying. The man was trying to say something to this woman. I obviously completely misread it, but it kind of slid into my head as a conversation that, this woman, not the people who are actually talking, but in any book of mine, a woman who's trying to convince herself that leaving her family is a good idea. And it kind of built from there. So, I always compare writers to vultures, like, or even to people who are constantly looking for moments which they can put in a book. Like, I was in an awful accident some 11 years ago on the highway, and that found its way into one of my books. Because, sometimes you feel that most experiences, as a writer, I feel very shortchanged, that that this is all my life is, that I haven't had that many experiences to be able to write about it. So whatever experiences that I do have, I try to milk them. I try to get as much as I can. But at the same time, getting ideas, I think it's more about first being receptive to them, to trying to see that something, a small snippet, can become a book. It entirely depends on your frame of mind and how you kind of react to certain situations. So, like Shaili was saying, I don't carry a notebook with me. I use my phone's Google Keep, and I jot down, a snippet, a scene that I have, I may have witnessed while in the car, looking out of the window, stuck in the traffic. And some of these go on to become books, some of them don't. But, it's nice to look back on it. When I look back on those ideas several years later, I have no idea what I was thinking of when I jotted it down. But it could also kind of, spur me to write something else. So it kind of acts as a trigger, so the ideas are everywhere, is what I still believe in. But, it's more about how receptive we are to them and what we make of them.
Thank you.
Can I just add to that?
Parinda?
Yes.
Yes, please. Please, yes.
So no, that's beautifully put, Andaleeb. I often think about this too, right? How do you get ideas in general? How do you milk them? And I think in my experience, I think there's been two ways, right? There's sometimes stories just come to you and they fall in your lap if you are open enough, if you're receptive enough, if you're aware of the world around you, engaging with the world around you. things come to you. And other times you really have to go out of your comfort zone and seek them out, right? So, and a very funny incident that I just remembered, that I was in London once. It was December. It was, thick of winter. And 1 in the morning, when I was fast asleep, the smoke alarm went off. And so 200 of us, we just rushed down to the streets, right? And I grabbed my winter coat. It was freezing, it was sub-zero temperature. I'm so glad I grabbed that winter coat. So I was comfortable as we were all out on the streets. And I was just observing, I was half sleepy, but still observing people around me. Majority of the people had managed to grab, their winter coats. There were a good majority of people who were also in the bathrobes, because that's what people sleep in hotels. Then I saw this couple that was sharing a blanket with nothing else on. Then there were a bunch of, college boys who were drunk out of their minds and in their t-shirts. And then there was this elderly gentleman who had a towel on because he was in the middle of a shower when this happened. So just by observing that situation for 3 minutes, I got 5 stories out of it, right? Not that everything you observe makes it, but I think it's just the lens that you put on. If I see a lot of people, young people especially, we're all on our phones these days. When you go out, whether to a coffee shop or a grocery store down the street, if you block your environment out, you're not going to get any ideas because you're not seeing it. You're shunning the world around you, right? Yes. But if you keep your mind open and you let those things in, you're engaging with your surroundings. There's so much going on. I think I remember, I forget who said this, but somebody said that every person you meet is a full-length novel in themselves. So if you just allow yourself to converse with these new people that you aren't quite used to, there's so much you can get out of it, not just for story's sake, but just for entertainment's sake as well, right? So completely agree.
That's what I also used to tell. Sorry, that's what I just want to add something. I also used to tell the students, that I'm also guilty of this, being lost in my phone. When you're outside, it's a kind of, you're comfortable to just look at your phone. I usually end up reading a book. But sometimes it helps if you're not, your eyes are not glued to the phone and you are looking around. There is so much to see. There is so much to observe. Entire lives flashing by you, So, yeah. Sorry to interrupt.
Not at all. Not at all.
Really.
In fact, Parinda, I also wanted to ask you, you work for a fashion startup. And I assume it's a full-time job. You also have a family to look after. And it is often said that if you really want to write, you'll make time for it. But all of us know that it's not that easy. So what is a day in your life like on the days that you write? How? Because, you have to manage so many things, juggle so many things.
Yeah, so I write every day. I feel like as a woman of a certain age and stage in present time, so I'm in my early 40s, I'm married with a child. Life is awfully demanding of us. There's, the offsprings, there's the family, the household, the work, there's the social commitments, there's the workouts in the gyms, and a million other things that we're constantly fighting for our mind space, right? Think about the number of decisions we have to make on a day-to-day basis. So I feel like every time I set out to do something like, write a full-length novel or a screenplay, I feel like such an underdog when I plan something big, because the odds are always against me. That's what I feel. I feel like I'll never be able to finish it. I'm unfortunately not half as prolific as Andaleeb here. So it's also not the question of how much physical time, I can make in a day to pursue what makes me happy. Like writing brings me unprecedented joy. It's my passion. It's my love. I also love my day job. So I feel like I'm torn between two lovers here. But it's at the end of the day, and I try to write every night, it's that, my body may be exhausted, but is my mind still fresh? That's all it takes for me to, get a little bit of writing in. That's why it takes me a very long time to write novels. It takes me about 2 years because I take my own sweet time. And even when I'm not writing every day, I'm still thinking about it. So the analogy I give there is, labor versus gestation, right? It took me 20 hours to push out my kid, but there was a 9-month gestation before that, and months of prepping my body even before. So it's not the physical act of writing. I love this story by Aaron Sorkin, the very popular screenplay writer here in Hollywood, who said that when I start writing my screenplay, I'm done in less than a week because I've spent 3 years before that figuring out exactly every character and every situation, and the back and forth. So it's all fleshed out to such an extent that when he starts writing, he just has to write it out. And so I think writing is not just about sitting at your desk and writing, right? When you're cooking, when you're out on the run, when you're laying in your bed, daydreaming, you're still thinking about your characters. At times when I do that, when I'm in the thick of writing something, so all of that gets counted towards writing. It's not just sitting down and writing, right? So those moments you can always steal in the day. It just depends on how badly you want it. If you want something really badly enough, you find a way to do it.
Okay, thank you. Shaili, suppose you have to write, an urgent opinion piece. So, you want to respond to something immediately. So is it straight off the cuff, extremely spontaneous, or do you need to take time to think and reflect? And what if there is a stringent deadline? Then do you get time to revise? How do you go about it?
So I think one should always cater for time to revise. That's a rule with me, because that, I think, in any case, is something that makes you get better at your craft. But I think having trained as a journalist, where my first 1 week of training went in thinking of, literally ideas and verbalizing them by word prompts and blindly typing. That kind of training has really held me in good stead, 20 years down, to be able to at least put out a first quick, strong version of an opinion on which I have an opinion. One of the things that I always encourage in our teams at She the People is that to not have an opinion where they don't have one, so that they don't have to force themselves to write something that they don't feel passionately about or passionately against, So that's one thing I think that is really important, is that to have an idea that you want to verbalize or share or write down because you believe in it. The second is that, yes, there can be deadline pressures, but deadline pressures are everywhere. When you ask a book writer who's writing 65,000 words, that deadline seems just pretty much imminent, like right here, right? Even if you have to submit it, let's say, a few months down. It's the quantum of writing. So to me personally, deadlines will always be there and should be there, because they really improve your ability to write, and they push you to do better. They push you to revise. They push you to make the most of that little window that you have to perform. Yeah.
And your books have been, collections of interviews with path-breaking and fascinating opinion leaders. So what is that process like? The interviews, the transcription, all of that. And how long does it take?
So I think, like somebody here was mentioning about how well prepped one can be. So I think there's a lot that goes into prep. So when I'm thinking about how I did the book when I was 25, published by Penguin Random House, it's really about how leaders were in their 20s and what kind of risks they took. And a lot of prominent leaders. I mean, what was, for example, Dimple Kapadia doing? She was retired, right, after having kids, and delivered the best possible, films that she could at 18. At 25, P. Chidambaram was not even thinking finance ministership, because he was still a Jholawala communist, and how many people knew that, right? Or for example, Rajdeep was preparing to be a cricketer, who's now a news presenter. So all of these stories sort of happen in a way that there was a great deal of prep going into how I'd write these pieces. But when I finally got to them, I recognized that, whether Shashi Tharoor or anybody else, they're just going to give me that 1 hour, right? Or 1 hour and a half. I'm not going to get like long hours with them, because these are busy people. So I had a lot of my research done, and I've basically aimed at asking them questions that nobody else had asked them so far, which I think is a really good trait whenever you're doing any interviews. And I hear that more and more when I do interviews, only because I feel a lot of people go in for, let's say, for example, yesterday I was interviewing a film star who sent me a message saying that he was so delighted that I asked the questions I did. And I was wondering why. And so he said that, look, you're constantly asked about what you do on an everyday basis. People don't think you have a mind, and people don't feel like juggling your mind and your thinking and your opinions. So I spent a little bit of time thinking like that, because then I get a different story from what's already written, right? I mean, Adi Godrej being a bellboy at a hotel in New York is not something that was written before I captured it in the book when I did. So I think it's a very interesting approach that has worked for me. I did the same with Feminist Rani, which I co-authored, and I continue to do that even for a book that's coming up on the women's economy later this year, to see how I can do it differently. Because to be honest, people exist. Many stories have been told, and especially if you're doing that of large personalities, which I have done a bunch of anthologies of, you will then struggle. And to beat that struggle, one should really invest in a prep much before.
Thank you, Shaili. And we have just about 5 minutes left. So very quick questions, a couple of them only, and short answers, please. Andaleeb, what kind of a writer are you? Are you a plotter or a pantser?
So I'm a little bit of both. I used to be a pantser when I started out. I had no clue what I was doing, but I started plotting my books after my fourth or fifth book. It made it easier. So now I kind of try and balance both. I do a bit of plotting, but I also give enough space to make changes along the way.
And from the first time you wrote your book to your latest book, what have you learned about the process of writing? Can you tell me in one line? That's difficult,
So
I know, but
I didn't know what plot meant, when I wrote my first novel. I didn't know what the meaning of plot was. It was just an experiment for me. So I have learned, I think, the idea of creating a new world in itself, trying to form new characters, a new world. So it's been a huge learning process.
thank you. Parinda, what is the best best writing advice that you've received, and what will you tell aspiring writers?
The best writing advice I received was to dig deeper. I'm not a very emotional person. I don't dwell on things that haven't gone too well for me. But if my characters don't dwell on it either, and they're just quickly moving on from strength to strength, then there is not much emotion that I'm eliciting out of it. As Shaili earlier said, it's pain that really pushes it. And so I didn't think I had it in me. And one of my mentors really asked me to dig deeper. And I think I've been able to do that with my latest novel, which is A House Full of Men, which is far more emotional than my previous novels. I think that's something I've been able to do. As far as the tips I would give, I think one of the things I really touched upon was, observing the world around you and letting it in. I would also say that as writers, if you want stories, cut out the small talk. When you meet people, don't just say how's your day going, or what are you doing this weekend. You can't go much further with those questions. Ask them random questions. Ask them if they've ever fed a monkey, and you'll be surprised at what stories you get out of it. Don't break the routine is what I do. Don't just go from point A to point B, literally and figuratively, right? Skip point B for once, and take a different lane, get up at a different station. Talk to a different group of people in a social circle, and you'll be surprised at the kind of insights and the stories that you'll get from these people. Go ahead, sorry.
Sure. How has the pandemic impacted your writing?
The pandemic my stories are lighthearted stories. I add a lot of emotion and humor in them, and for that I feel like I thrive on social connections. And with this work from home situation that has happened for the past 2 years, I've missed out on a lot of those connections. I'm slowly getting back into the world, but it hasn't been the same. And that's not to say that I need to be jet setting off to 1 month trip to Europe to be able to write. That's not what I need. What I need is real day-to-day conversations with people just to keep those things going. Because ultimately, my characters are messy and raw in a way that I hope will ring true, and to make them relatable. A lot of inspiration I draw is from people, places, and things around me. And when that is not available to me, it does become a bit of, there's not much to dip into, right? So it's been tough, but we've all slowly learning. I don't want to keep saying new normal, but I think we've all learned how to cope with the new normal and to find ways to get around it. So, yeah.
Shaili, I'm coming back to you. So what are your writing goals for this year?
Well, just get my new book out. It's a very big writing goal for me. COVID has pushed my book several times, both in terms of writing, having a mental block, writer's block, also having to not want to come out with a book in the middle of COVID, since I just didn't feel like getting out there to market a book in the middle of suffering, to be honest. And it's probably because my book is more about the women's economy and has nothing to do with personal suffering. So so that's definitely what I want to do, is to get it out there and be focused on marketing it and sharing it and talking to people about it, because I'm terrible at it. Once I write a book, I feel like that's like I'm spent, right? So I'm trying to conserve some energy that can do what authors must do, which is take the book places.
I think with that, we have come to the end of the session. And thank you so much, all of you, for those wonderful tips. And if you can hold up your books, for our viewers, it'll be wonderful. Yes. Andaleeb, do you have yours?
Yeah,
this is my last book, I must add. My new one is yet to come out.
So these two came out last year.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us at She the People. Thank you, viewers, for being with us. And it was a wonderful session. Such a pleasure. Thanks a ton.
Thank
you.
Thank you, Archana.